Hello, and thank you for joining us for the Voice of the People podcast here on KXNet.com. I'm Nicholas Kwalik, your host. The month of March is recognized as National Music in Schools Month by the National Association for Music Education. And joining me to talk about music education are two music educators. First of all, Dave Augustat from Walker Middle School here in Bismarck, and from the University of Mary, the director of bands, high brass, and the music education program, Dennis Gowan. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me.
For having us.
Great to be here. Thank you for having us.
My pleasure. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about how you got into this line of work. Dave, let's start with you.
Right. This is my 20th year at Walker Middle School. I've been here the whole time. I am a product of Bismarck Public Schools music education program. I went out to the University of Mary and had Mr. Gowan as an instructor while I was out there. As a music educator, I again teach 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade band. I'm part of our beginner band program in the summertime as we get those 6th graders ready. I also do some adjunct work out at the University of Mary teaching guitar. And so that's kind of what I do.
And what was your primary instrument?
So my primary instruments, I started on saxophone and then saw the light and went to low brass in high school. And that was for band. Back in the 2nd grade is when I started playing guitar and taking guitar lessons. And so out at Mary, I was guitar major and tuba major.
Okay, well, as a trombone player, I can tell you low brass and strings is where it's at, in my opinion. But I know Dennis probably might disagree with us. Dennis, how about you? How did you get into music?
Well, just to go back, sort of like what David just said, my first instrument was actually clarinet. So David and I have a little bit in common, where he started as a saxophone player and I started as a clarinet player. But I had a lot of friends who were playing brass instruments, and I was always intrigued by, what they sounded like. And, hey, how do you do that? Hey, show me what you're doing there. So, somewhere around, I think, 10th grade, I made the switch myself. And then when I went to college at the University of Southern Maine, which is where I'm from Maine originally, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I was undecided, but I ended up, doing music, a lot of music. So I was in band, I was in a trumpet quartet, I was in jazz ensemble, taking lessons, all those things. But I was also studying computers, which kind of at that time, I'm guessing Bill Gates is probably 2 or 3 years older than I am. So that was a time, I suppose, to be in computers if you really wanted to make it big. And then I was also interested in languages as well. But I ended up, by the December of my first year, I ended up deciding music is where I wanted to be. And so I pursued both education and also performance. And so I did some trumpet recitals while I was in undergrad. Then I went to graduate school and did the same thing there for conducting and for trumpet performance. And I've had the real pleasure of having a chance to play in ensembles here in town, the symphony, the chamber orchestra, and now having conducted both groups, before and sometimes continuously with the chamber orchestra, kind of a bit outside of what I do here. But then here, as you said, I'm the director of bands, and I teach the horn and trumpet lessons primarily. I taught all brass, so I would have had trombone back in the day, and I did teach David back in the day. And then we ended up growing, and that was a good thing to happen. So we ended up adding more faculty, and I was able to focus more on the high brass. And then I also, as you said, I also help guide the music education program here as well.
Everybody's path is a little bit different. I can vividly remember watching and listening to classical music growing up back in Ohio. Did both of you grow up listening to classical music at all?
For sure I did. I was bugging my dad all the time. Hey, well, back then, of course, you got to realize it was vinyl and then tapes. But I remember asking just bugging my dad quite often, hey, I'd like to get this recording. I've heard about this. I don't even know, today we hear about things through the internet, through our phones, through our computers, YouTube. I don't really know where I heard about how to listen to this piece or that piece, or, hey, you really ought to check this out. You got to check that out. Other than people just kind of talk to you about it and you heard about it. So I grew up listening to a lot of music, had a chance to hear Harry James live, got a chance to meet him, Doc Severinsen, Maynard Ferguson, some of the great trumpet players in the past, which was really fantastic. And a lot of jazz groups, a lot of orchestras, a lot of brass groups. So for me, it was just really a lot of stuff. And that's what I think my experience with that made me ultimately have that passion that I think music is kind of where I want to be. But, you know, when you're starting in college, so many people are undecided. That's why I wasn't totally sure, but that first semester kind of solidified it for me.
Dave, how about you? What did you listen to when you were growing up?
So growing up, it was very eclectic mix of music. And so I had a big old box of 45s that were my mom's. And so there was some, a lot of Roy Orbison in there, and there was Beatles. Stumbled upon the stash of records that were my parents when they were younger than I. And so so I grew up vinyl and made the cassette transition. I know that was a huge moment for me when I had saved up enough lawn mowing money to buy my first cassette tape. And I think that's one of the differences in like my experience listening to music as a student. When I look at my students and how they experience music, you appreciated it more, because I remember I'd have to ride my bike all the way to where B-Dubs is now, when it was Music Syndicate, and then that's where I would spend my hard-earned money, and you appreciated it because you bought it, it was yours, and you'd ride it home, and you didn't have the world's music at your fingertips, and so you appreciated what you had. And having those big huge gatefolds, and you open it up, and as you're listening to it, you read it, you read the liner notes, you read the lyrics, you're experiencing kind of a holistic approach to the music you're enjoying. And I noticed that is maybe one difference between those of us of a certain generation and maybe currently, but yeah, it was so it was kind of your 60s kind of going into 70s music growing up. But then there wasn't a lot of more the pop stations. There was always Prairie Public on when at home, and so got a nice appreciation for jazz, for classical music growing up. Often went to the symphony as a kid with my parents. Always looked forward to the UMary Jazz Festival every year. That was a huge deal. And so like when I was old enough to participate as a student, that was huge for me. But just I was always kind of engaged in it, and it was always part of our life. And even to this day, when we go over to my parents, there's always something playing.
Full disclosure, I mentioned I was a former aspiring music educator at the turn of the century. I can't believe I'm saying that. but you know, one of the things that kind of struck me, I remember vividly, was talking to one of my former classmates and asking, well, what kind of classical music do you listen to? And they said, well, I don't listen to classical music. And I thought, well, how can you get into this line of work? So nowadays, to both of you, is it a requirement, or is it a nice background to have some classical music knowledge, or is that even a requirement nowadays?
Do you mean like for a person who's going to be just kind of out there in society? Is it good?
No,
for
just
them
a music
to have
educator.
that?
Do you need to know
as a music educator? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think so, because so much, I mean, and I think if you got the choral perspective, you'd say that, I mean, so much of our music that began where we are today was from centuries ago. You know, the instrumental world isn't quite as old as the choral world, but we have music from at least a couple centuries, or well, more like 4, I guess you could say, that we really learn. I mean, a lot of what we teach in terms of music theory, how music is put together, which we then go out and teach our students, you know, a little bit about. I mean, I mean, David could speak to this, but just the idea of wanting your students at various levels, elementary, if there is band at elementary, but then definitely at the middle school and high school, wanting them to understand a little bit about the music, the inner workings of how the music's put together, because they're going to appreciate it so much more. You know, part of the term, the course, one of the courses that's offered at every university, music appreciation, the idea is that we understand it from a little more of an internal standpoint. So when I'm teaching that class and I'm working with students who, well, maybe they played drums back in middle school, maybe they whatever, but they're just taking the class because they need an art credit, I get them involved in hearing all the different components, like all the different elements of music. So when we're talking about rhythm, I'm not going to just start talking about rhythm. I'm going to talk about something in life that has a certain pattern to it, and then I'll try to relay that, you know, just kind of relay that to them in a different way. But I think that's where so much of our music understanding of how music is put together, and then how music in the modern days can be pulled apart because of how it was put together originally.
And like I think about my guitar students out at UMary, where some of them are music educator or music majors. They want to major on the instrument, and we take a different approach there. But a lot of those students, and it's interesting, like my first question is, okay, you're in college now, you're wanting to learn a new instrument. Why? And so one of the common things is, well, I quit band when I was in middle school, and I kind of wish I wouldn't have, and I want an instrument. And so, but by that age, playing simple melodies out of a book, that's not really your end goal. You want to be able to strum along with some of the music you enjoy and all that. So try to get some very common music theory. And so we always start with the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord. And if you can get those down, there's a lot you can do. And if you add that minor 6, you can pretty much play any pop song. And so so then some kids, well, I don't want to do this because I like this style of music. I'm like, well, if you strum your 1 4 5 this way, now it's a Johnny Cash song, but the same chord progression, do it this way, it's a blues song. This way, it's this song. And so trying to find using that theory aspect to get the kind of commonalities amongst music and to have a better appreciation of the broader scope and where it comes from. And then even with my own students at the middle school level, with modern music, like a lot of samples and borrowing and things like that, if I can find a piece of music that students like, then we look at that, and then before, when they're coming in, I'll play the actual piece that it was sampled from. And then the kids are like, oh, you're playing the new whatever. I'm like, no, actually listen. And then we can take it back to the roots that way. Yeah. And so I'll start from where they are now, and I'll bring it down to kind of those root levels and say, okay, now if you like that, if you like what this modern person is doing, they borrowed it from this person. Now let's look at what these people liked. And so I'll go kind of that backward approach to kind of that music history. And then it ultimately does get into more that classical style of music. Or even with my 6th graders, one thing I'll do is like, just to see if they can produce a tone, if they're comprehending a rhythm, get the fingerings out of it. I'll have them you pick a fingering. I don't even care if you've played it before, like just pick a fingering and let's do this rhythm exercise. And it's an experience. And then they all laugh and giggle. And then I'll play the second part of The Rite of Spring. Wow. And then they're like, that's what we just played. Like, well, not quite. There was a little more intentionality to it, but a little more. But then they're like, well, that was really cool. It was an actual piece of music. And this beginning band student felt like they were actually playing something similar to that. And so you can take kind of different creative approaches to introducing that kind of theory or the historic aspect of it.
Yeah, going back to those chords, if you throw in a 2-5-7, then you got something really talking about. But that's another.
Oh, exactly. I think it was Lou Reed that said, if you have 1 chord, that's enough. 2 chords, you're showing off. 3 chords, it's jazz.
That's right. So now there's no coincidence to our viewers. I asked both of you on here because you're both at different ends of the education spectrum, the middle school and the collegiate level. So let's talk about that. How, when you first started your career to now, in your opinions, how has music educated become more appreciated by both students and I guess the just society in general? Has it changed? Has it gotten better? Has it gotten worse? Dennis, so let's start with you.
Yeah, I think that's a real tough one to put a finger on, to really nail down. I'm seeing, at least currently now, I'm seeing a really great amount of students sending in to me interest forms that say they would like to participate in our band program. And it's kind of been a very steady increase for a little while. And I don't know, I mean, part of that could just be ongoing increasing of recruiting methods and outreach that we do, more touring nowadays, more mailings or emails or texts, because who knows who's going to read an email or whatever. But just I think I'm seeing more, and I think that's wonderful. I also know the students are into more things that want to also be involved with band or with choir or with orchestra. So we're seeing kind of good numbers in all the areas. And I suppose if I went back, I would see there are, a few dips and turns here and there. Of course, everyone talks about, COVID from just a few years ago. And I know, as in talking with a lot of the directors in town, particularly at the high school level, they all found that, just because of how they had to teach in a hybrid fashion or in a remote fashion, that really was a very big challenge for them recruiting wise. And I think now we're starting to see that come back out up over the surface. It's kind of breaching the surface of the ocean now, I think. But I'm seeing a lot of good interest, and I'm finding students I think they want to continue to participate for the right reasons too. I mean, and not that there's only one right reason, but just the idea that they feel it means something to them. They feel it has the creativity and art and aesthetics, artistry too, but aesthetics. Just the concept, and I teach this in my secondary instrumental methods class, that the aesthetics are really something that's at the core of every single human being, you know. And if you can go back to the Greeks, you can go back 2,500 years and look at how important sports were, how important the artistic areas were, and then also how important the general subjects were as well. But I'm really pleased with the fact that we still see, and I always would love to see more, of course, that's the nature of what we do to try to grow our programs, but I'm really pleased with the number of students that want to come through and participate. And they know it'll take a little time, it'll take some practice on their own, in addition to what we do together. And they'll get a couple tours maybe out of it, or maybe every so many years we'll get an overseas tour for them that they would take advantage of. So I don't know if that's kind of answers what you're going for, but I think that's kind of I'm really pleased with that. And I think it's happened in our choral program, it's happened in our band program, and in our string program as well.
And I'm going to get back to one of those topics before we end here, but Dave, I want to throw it to you now, because you get them at a more rawer stage with kind of, like I said, you kind of touched on it, Dennis, with talking about, Jane and Johnny are on the track team, they're on the soccer team, and then they're in music. So, but now we go to a more middle school level where they're just kind of figuring out how much I like it. So the curiosity in kids that you're teaching with, Dave, is it more raw? Do they kind of know what they like? Tell us about that.
So if I look back on the 2 decades now of doing this, it's ebbs and flows. And so just natural dips, and some years you have higher attrition, some years you have lower. The first, I'm trying to remember, 8-9 years of my teaching, we had 7th, 8th, and 9th grade at the middle school. So band had started already in 5th grade. And so one of the things that we had noticed is that when we stopped doing 5th grade band, started up in 6th grade, and then the 6th grade moved up to the middle school. So now I'm getting, like, when a student comes to me, I'm that first stop. And we are noticing much larger numbers, greater interest, and attrition has been not as much of an issue with that. And your attrition is always going to be the highest. Typically when you are moving from one building to another building educationally. And so removing a stop, I think, helped with that. You're still going to see that, in our case, 8th grade going into 9th grade, maybe some attrition. But I think from this level, a lot of times people will view middle school as finding what you're good at, is the phrase that's often used. But sometimes I notice students will confuse what they're good at with what comes easy. And that's one of the pushes, is realizing what music actually is. When you're playing music, you are translating a language. You're having to delve into the grammar of that language. You are having to do math because it's all ratios and fractions. You're having to do physics. So it's so much all at once that it's a total brain workout. And so trying to help students realize that you're not always going to be good at something the very first time you do it. It does take a little bit of work, but we'll help you get to that step. But you have to kind of trust us and go on that journey with us to get you to a point where you do feel comfortable. I don't know if I even feel comfortable on an instrument yet, but I'm getting there.
You took some of the thoughts right out of my mouth. Yeah, math, language, foreign language. So we are, believe it or not, we're coming up on time here just a little bit, but I want to just kind of close with this. As educators, what else do you both feel can be done to educate, if you will, the importance of music in society and not just being seen as some sort of an extracurricular activity?
Go ahead, David. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Um, I would say, and just with that last question too, one of the changes that we've seen, and this is, it's not bad, it's not good, it just is, but there's a push for really trying to get kids locked into what do you want to do as an adult. And we have our career technical education that's been really, really important within education as a whole, and really pushing that next step career. And I do understand a lot of students might not view music as a career, so then they want to stop so they can focus on those career ready things. But I think it's that, again, the holistic approach and getting students to realize that it is that human experience. Making music, having that aesthetic experience, that is part of being human. One of the things that I always go back to is there was a conference here in town at Legacy High School years ago, and they brought in a gentleman by the name of Jaron Lanier, and he's touted as the father of virtual reality. And so there was a student there said, I want a job in tech, and what classes do I need to make sure I take in high school to do what you did and have your career? He said, well, obviously your maths, your sciences, your computer sciences, but go home tonight and learn the clarinet, because if you can wrap your head around the clarinet, you'll be able to solve anything. And you won't be making technology for the sake of technology. You'll be making technology for humans, because you will understand what it means to be human.
Dennis?
Yeah. And I guess what I would add to that is that's very, very wonderful information there. I think what I would add would just be, you know, there's a video that people can check out sometime on YouTube. It's called Why Music Matters. And it's by Jack Stamp, and it's kind of black. It's just an audio, so you just see a black screen. If you want to find the Muppets version, that's very humorous, but I think just listening to the audio is very good. He shows how music, you just have to be so all-encompassing, like what Dave was talking about. It's using every part of your brain. And just in a nutshell, the idea that in order to get an A in a math class, you have to get 93 or above, for example. And in order to get an A, in order for a band to play an A, if every person makes one mistake, what will it sound like? And he actually did this at one of his honor bands that he was doing. This is part of the recording. He plays this selection, I think it was Shenandoah. He plays it just beautifully first time, and then the next time he plays it, and every student makes only one mistake, guaranteeing them an A. And it sounded like beginner band, you know, because where students don't understand a lot of those things that they end up learning once they're in high school. And that was just one component, playing the right notes. We also have rhythm. We also have tone quality. We also have how you articulate, how you change from one note to the next. Do you slur? Do you tongue? Do you go staccato? Do you and then balance and blend within an ensemble? But I think once you get students involved with that, I mean, there will be some for whom it doesn't resonate, but the numbers of students I'm seeing that it resonates with, I think that's maybe what I'm seeing more of. And kudos to people like Dave who are doing all that work in such those vital areas of when the students are starting. I mean, that is so incredibly critical. But just hopefully trying to get the whole human being to the whole student to understand what the whole human being is. We're part of a lot of different things, and that some sort of musical and aesthetic you know, participation and enjoyment, and also benefit and growth is so important to the human person. And maybe we need that now, you know, a lot more than in the past. Maybe we need it just as much as in the past. I don't know. We'll let other people decide on that. But
yes, and yeah, deeply philosophical, something, you know, we never really intend to talk about, but somehow we always sort of wind up getting there. So as you can probably tell, we could talk about this for
right.
many more hours ongoing, but unfortunately we just don't have the time. But I do want to thank you gentlemen so much for taking the time and talk about something you're obviously very passionate about, and you know, hopefully our viewers will take something away from this as well. So thank you both again so much, and thank you so much for watching the Voice of the People podcast. We'll be back next Monday at 5 p.m. Central with more questions and answers affecting you. Remember, it's your voice that matters, the voice of the people.